Can't decide and torn between a romantic, comedy, action, or an indie film to watch for the weekend? Well. Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast is your ultimate guide to the latest movies. Join us as we dissect the latest on the blockbusters. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast.
GSMC Movie Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Rich McDonough, and this episode of the podcast should be coming to you in April. Hopefully spring is in full bloom wherever you are listening to the podcast. Vaccinations are being doled out, and we are moving one step closer to the world being a little bit more normal. While I am going to miss the ability to skip shaving for a few days because the mask covers it all, I'm ready to get back to normal. But here on the GSMC Movie Podcast, we will keeping things the status quo, and I'll be talking about a couple new releases, starting off with Shiva Baby, a film about a character who is essentially living a double life, and, as one can imagine, runs into a little trouble maintaining the two sides to her personality. After that, I will be taking a look at the film Thunderforce, which is a bit of a satirical take on the whole superhero genre, where two estranged friends have to come back together in order to fight the many supervillains that are plaguing society. Finally, I will be taking a look at a film called My True Fairytale, which follows the story of two friends that are in a horrific car accident. Fortunately, they both survive, and one goes back to her life as normal. One, however, completely disappears and sets out on the life she's always wanted. So that story looks like it'll be fun to deconstruct and unpack. And in our final segment, I have realized that this is the 5-year anniversary of Marvel's Captain America Civil War. So I'm going to be taking a look at that film and what it's meant for the film industry. And on a wider topic, how it's kind of a great example of the death of the movie star. So I will be diving into all those films and topics on this episode of the GSMC Movie Podcast. But as I start every episode, I'm going to be taking a look at a film from the book 1001 Movies You Must See Before You Die. And hopefully living in a pandemic has lit a fire under some of you to not only see a couple movies before you die, but do a lot of things you have always wanted to do with your life. I wish all of you the best in all those other endeavors, but we'll keep it to the film here, and the one I'll be examining today is Brian De Palma's adaptation of Stephen King's Carrie. And before getting into the film, just to pay homage for a moment to the two real creative geniuses behind the film, Brian De Palma, who would later go on to direct classics such as Scarface, and Stephen King, who wrote the book that the film was adapted off of, who may be responsible for more American horror stories than anybody living. It is just a natural formula for success combining the two of them. And it is no surprise that the film Carrie would go on to become one of the best horror classics of all time, and is worthy of inclusion in this book. And while with Carrie predominantly being a horror film, what else would you expect from something adapted from a Stephen King novel? There are a lot more elements at play in this film. I know that the 80s and filmmakers like John Hughes are really remembered for defining that era of teen drama with adolescent characters looking to find themselves. Despite this film Carrie having a lot going on for it, it at its heart is really the story of a girl that feels like an outcast and is just looking to belong. Now, the things that are making her stand out from the crowd are a little bit more, I guess we'll call them supernatural than the average problems a teenager is facing. But the lead actress in the film, Sissy Spacek, gives this tremendous performance, soliciting sympathy from the audience, not only making you feel bad for the character of Carrie, but really rooting for her to have things get better for her. Now, this film is a collaboration of Brian De Palma and Stephen King, so if you are counting on a happy ending, you might want to temper your expectations, because they will tease a happy ending, but they will also deliver some, let's call them graphic visuals. And not to give anything away, but the climactic scene from this film has been parodied and repurposed in so many different forums that even if you've never seen Carrie, you're probably well aware of what happens at the end of the film. Now, I'm sure that because this film came out in 1976, there are parts of the film that do not hold up well today. But I think the story of a teenager trying to belong and not identifying with her parents at home is a timeless tale. Throw in a bit of the supernatural, and what you have is a classic film. They did remake the film in 2013, starring Chloe Grace Moretz and Julianne Moore. But despite the caliber of actor you put into a remake, it cannot compare to Brian De Palma's 1976 original. So I highly encourage those of you who are interested in the horror genre to check out Carrie. And for those genuinely interested in watching the film, you can check it out on Hulu and Amazon Prime Video. So if you are looking for a classic to watch, I recommend Brian De Palma's Carrie. If you are looking for a new film to watch, I think you should check out Shiva Baby, which is going to be the film I will be covering in this segment of the GSMC movie podcast. And this film, Shiva Baby, sorry I've been mispronouncing it up to this point, is built around a fairly interesting concept where a character named Danielle is attending a Shiva, which for those of you who don't know, is a ceremony associated with the Jewish faith that takes place when someone has died. So in what should be a very somber, formal occasion, Danielle, who I should probably mention at this point is bisexual, because at this event she runs into both an ex-girlfriend of hers, who is very successful now in life, as well as a character that is simply referred to as her sugar daddy. Danielle is also a senior in college, so at an event where someone has died and a normal person would just like to pay their respects, she is having to juggle answering a bunch of questions about what she's going to do with her life, has to be in the same room as someone she used to date, as well as being around someone who we're not going to say they're in a relationship, or are we going to say that she is, let's go with the term, streetwalker? But the main basis for their relationship is they are intimate, and she benefits financially from it. So, fun times for Danielle. And just to put the cherry on top of this awkwardness sundae, her sugar daddy, as we'll refer to him, shows up with his wife and child. So just to reset for a moment, someone has died. This is a service to honor that person's life. Danielle is going to this service, and instead of being able to just simply pay her respects to the person that has passed away, she has to answer questions about her future from everybody asking her what she's going to do with her life. She has to deal with encountering an ex-girlfriend of hers, who it is described at one point gets a standing ovation for getting into law school, which is pretty much a direct contrast as to how Danielle is preparing for the future, while also having to deal with someone you are in, let's call it a relationship, also being there while you are pretty much their mistress. So that premise by itself sounds interesting, and I really don't think you need to have any insight into the Jewish faith to understand the plot of the film. Any gaps in information I'm sure will be filled in along the way. I personally do have Jewish cousins, so I have a little bit of knowledge of the Jewish faith and traditions. Thankfully, I've never had to go to a Shiva with everyone being happy and healthy at the moment. Knock on wood. And I'm sure there are aspects of the movie that will mean more to a Jewish audience. There will be certain humor that you may only really get if you are Jewish or familiar with Judaism. But at its core, this is a film about someone who really doesn't know where they're going with their life and having to face pressure from people around them. So unless you found your calling at 5 years old and pursued it ever since then, I'm sure that on some level, everyone will be able to relate to the main character's struggle. And I think the key point that people are going to be able to identify with is just having to juggle how you act around different people from different aspects of your life. We all act different around family as opposed to people that we work with and people that we're just friends with. Now in this film, the main character Danielle has to deal with all of that while also trying to be very respectful for the person that has passed away. And by no means do I want to stereotype this film and confine it solely to the Jewish humor genre of entertainment, but this sounds a lot like something that would happen on an episode of either Seinfeld or Curb Your Enthusiasm. It feels as though it's very much in the vein of that Seinfeld, Larry David type humor where it's just cringy and the people are put in incredibly awkward situations. Now, I guess the actual term for that is cringe humor, so this is a cringe humor type film, which the best way I can describe it, if you like the comedic situations where it also feels like someone's dragging nails across a chalkboard, and there are just chills running up and down your spine because of how awkward the situation is and how bad you feel for the person going through it, then Shiva Baby may be the film for you, purely for the Schadenfreude aspect of it. And the backstory to this film is very compelling. The writer and director, Emma Siegelman, who I'm guessing based the main character off herself a little bit because she is bisexual and Jewish. And the whole idea of this movie came from when she was at NYU, where she handed in a screenplay for one of her classes. It was some sort of sci-fi epic. Her professor really didn't get it. She didn't really understand what she was writing. She was really just trying to make it something that came off as epic. And the professor gave her the piece of advice, write what you know. And as a result of that advice, she came up with the first draft of what would eventually become Shiva Baby. And that piece of advice reminds me of an Oscar moment where Bong Joon-ho, the director of Parasite, was quoting Martin Scorsese in saying the most personal is the most creative when it comes to storytelling. That line of thinking clearly worked for the two of them, as they both gave this piece of advice while accepting an Academy Award for Best Director. And it has clearly worked for Siegelman, as she's drawing a whole ton of praise for her directorial debut. And that has really become a trend in the modern film industry. I once attended a talk where a couple producers were there, and one of them said that it used to be you were trying to find a story that would appeal to as many audiences as possible and had broad appeal. And now that's really shifted to where you're looking for a real niche story and banking on the fact that audiences are going to seek out things that they are not as familiar with. Now, of course, there are always going to be those films that have broad appeal and bring in the audiences because of that. Just look at the blockbuster landscape that we have right now. But one of the producers that was on the panel I was speaking of earlier, he helped produce Forgetting Sarah Marshall, and he told us that that was essentially just the story of one of his friends trying to get over a breakup. That film was incredibly successful, and while it did have a very talented cast, for every film like that that is successful, I'm sure you could pull at least 10 examples of films that aren't. So while we are in the age where the blockbuster rules all, there is clearly room for the standalone film that gets made and attracts audiences solely by the heart it has to it, for lack of a better term. And I really think that's a great thing, because how else are new visionaries going to be discovered? How are new filmmakers going to get the opportunity to show that they have the ability if the only films to hit theaters are overproduced mega blockbusters that have more input from studio executives that have no creative vision, with the plots being developed more by market research reports than by people who actually know how to tell a compelling story. So props to Emma Siegelman for not only being the director of the film, but also for writing the screenplay and proving that there is still opportunity for the little guy to make it in Hollywood. And for all of you out there who are interested in checking out Shiva Baby, it is having a limited release in theaters, having made its debut April 2nd. But it will also be available via video on demand. So to anyone who is a fan of cringe humor, Shiva Baby seems to be straight up that alley. So be sure to check it out. Right now, however, we are going to take a quick break on the GSMC movie podcast, but you're not going to want to go anywhere as we have a lot more new releases to talk about. I want to talk about the new satire film, Thunderforce, which stars Megan McCarthy and Octavia Spencer as two estranged friends that come back together to, I guess in the good old cheesy fashion, fight evil. The film Thunderforce is supposed to be a parody of the superhero genre, and getting actresses the caliber of McCarthy and Octavia Spencer should make an enjoyable film. McCarthy has, of course, proven how funny she is in comedic roles. Octavia Spencer, I'm not really familiar with her in that setting, as she is more of a quote-unquote serious actor, and she is also someone I will probably always be a little bit weirded out by, given that she gave such a convincing performance in the film Ma. So it will be interesting to see another side of her in the new film Thunderforce. You are also going to want to stick around for the new film My True Fairytale, which is about two friends that are in a car crash together, and they both survive. One of them goes back to living her normal life, yet the other one mysteriously disappears. And the reason for this disappearance is because that character is setting out to live the life they've always wanted to live, as opposed to going back to the life they've always known. That sounds like a fun premise, and I'm sure members of the audience wish they could live that life too. So definitely stick around for that. And at the end of the show, I will be commemorating the 5th anniversary of Captain America Civil War by not only talking about the film, but really diving into what it really signaled for Hollywood blockbusters, including something that has been an ongoing topic in the film industry, and that is the death of the movie star. So don't go anywhere. We'll be getting into all this and more on the GSMC Movie Podcast, and we will be right back.
Want to know the latest and hottest music hitting the airwaves? Don't be left out. Listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Music Podcast. It keeps you on the loop with everything you need to know from pop, rock, hip-hop, and the top 40. And we'll throw in news of your favorite artists, concert and tour dates, and so much more. Listen no further, because this is the gold standard in music podcast.
Welcome back into the GSMC Movie Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Rich McDonough, and in my last segment, I just wrapped up talking about the new film Shiva Baby, the new Cringe comedy film where a woman has to attend a traditional Jewish funeral service. And this turns into her having to juggle the many aspects of her personality, as she is being pestered by her family members about what she's going to do with her life after she graduates college. She also runs into an ex-girlfriend of hers as she swings from both sides of the plate. And that is not even the most awkward interaction. It comes with a romantic partner she has to endure, because guess who else shows up? A guy she is currently having an affair with, where their relationship is described as he is her sugar daddy, and he shows up with his wife and infant child. So imagine having to deal with all that while you're simply trying to be respectful and pay homage to the dead. This film, Shiva Baby, is the directorial debut of Emma Siegel, who also wrote the script, and it made its debut in theaters April 2nd, so go check it out. And it is also available via video on demand. So if you are a fan of cringy humor, where the main characters are put in situations where it's like nails running across a chalkboard, be sure to check out Shiva Baby. But moving right along, on this episode of the podcast, I'm going to be talking about the more upfront comedy, and that will be the Netflix original Thunderforce, which is making its debut April 9th. It is supposed to be of a satirical take on the superhero genre, starring Melissa McCarthy and Octavia Spencer, so definitely stick around to hear about that film. Also, be sure to stick around till the end of the show, as I'm going to be talking about a traditional superhero film which came out 5 years ago, and that is Captain America Civil War. I'll talk a little bit about the film and what it really meant, but also what it meant on a larger scale, and how it's really a prime example of a topic that has been kicked around pretty much for the last decade, and that is the death of the movie star. So you will definitely want to stick around for that, but for the time being, let us jump right into Thunderforce. Like I said earlier, this is a Netflix original, so who knows what you're going to get with this one. Mostly because when it comes to Netflix's strategy about their original content, it is more about quantity than quality. but who knows? Even though they find their most success with their own original content on the series side of things, they did have hits like Bird Box and Marriage Story, which was nominated for 7 Academy Awards. Now, am I expecting Thunderforce to have any Academy Award consideration? Not in the slightest. Not to be rude to anyone who has worked on the film, but this clearly looks like just a good old-fashioned fun-loving comedy with a little bit of an outrageous premise. And to give you a bit of an idea of what that premise is, this film is about 2 estranged friends that have not seen each other for years, but Melissa McCarthy's character, Lydia, seeks out Octavia Spencer's character of Emily after many, many years. And as it turns out, Emily is a biologist working for a company that is essentially working on serums that can turn the average person into a superhero. Or I guess I should say it gives them superhuman abilities. The choice to be a hero is up to them, although we are all the hero in our own mind. But long story short, Octavia Spencer's character is developing these serums, and Melissa McCarthy's character accidentally takes one. Because, and I'm sure we can all relate to this, when we find ourselves in a laboratory, which as we all know happens from time to time, it is almost inevitable you end up stabbing yourself with a syringe full of genetic enhancing material. So the character of Lydia becomes super strong, and Octavia Spencer's character Emily has already been experimenting on herself, and she has the ability to turn invisible. So now that they each have superhuman abilities, the natural next step is to team up and fight crime. So it is a crazy premise, but I guess no crazier than any other superhero film. And to give my 2 cents worth of film analysis, I'm sure that the message is rooted in female empowerment, as well as supporting your fellow female, given that they're 2 friends that are coming back together, and reestablishing a positive relationship after so many years. So even though it is a goofy comedy film, it can still have a positive message in that respect. I also do think there is a message being sent, as well as commentary being made, that the 2 main actresses in this film are on the heavier side, and when you traditionally think of a superhero physique, for a man, it's a guy with muscles in places most people don't even have places. And in the case of a female superhero, it's someone who is very in shape with augmented assets and skin-tight uniforms. So I'm sure one reason this film stars actresses like Megan McCarthy and Octavia Spencer is because they are plus-sized, and while the main message of this film is going to be entertain and provide a few laughs, I'm sure there is also something to the idea of people that are on the heavier side still being able to perform incredible feats. So it appears Thunderforce, in addition to being a satire of the superhero genre, is also going to be a very body-positive movie, which I guess is also supposed to be some of the setup for the comedy in the film. Given that when you think of a superhero or just take a look at a superhero film, it's usually someone in the prime of life in peak physical condition. Heck, even someone like Paul Rudd got in pretty good shape for the Ant-Man film. He was required to have 1 shirtless scene, so he felt compelled to get himself a 6-pack. So good for him on that front. And I don't want it to sound like I'm ragging on people that are in traditional superhero films for being in good shape, because that's kind of what we should all aspire to do. Eat right, get plenty of exercise. Now it is a lot easier for people that are contractually obligated to have a certain style of physique. And unfortunately in America, if you take a look at the statistics, the average person is a lot closer to the main characters in Thunderstruck than we are to any Marvel or DC superhero. But here's the thing, and here's probably what part of this movie is trying to say. As long as you don't have any major health risks, that's okay. Quite literally, in our society, if you are not a professional athlete or an actor who has to be portraying someone at the peak of physical fitness, and you are able to go about your day normally without any major roadblocks, it's not really that big a deal if you're carrying a little bit of extra weight. So, while this film is mainly going to be making fun of the tropes that have just become commonplace in superhero films, that doesn't mean it can't have a message of its own. But amateur analysis and social commentary aside, this film Thunderforce should shape up to be a fairly good comedy. As I said, the two main stars are Melissa McCarthy and Octavia Spencer, and I would really just like to take a moment to give props to Melissa McCarthy. She kind of exploded out of nowhere, though I guess I should mention she is a cousin of Jenny McCarthy. But still, after slogging through most of her career doing bit parts and minor characters, she finally had a breakthrough performance in Bridesmaids, where she really stole the show, and since then has gone on to have an incredibly successful comedic career, while also scooping up 2 Academy Award nominations. While I personally have not seen many of her films or watched an episode of the show that she had, Mike and Molly, I do not have a problem admitting that she is very funny, and props to her for having so many high-profile movies. And her latest one appears to be a friends and family affair, given that she and Octavia Spencer are friends in real life, and the director of the film is her husband, which actually seems to be a regular occurrence for the two of them, since this will be the 5th intermarriage collaboration they have produced. Falcone has directed other Melissa McCarthy movies, such as Tammy, The Boss, Life of the Party, and Superintelligence. So clearly this is a dynamic that works for the two of them, with one being the director and one being the actor, with there seeming to be no repercussions on their marriage relationship, which is just something I find hard to comprehend because I really just don't know how married couples can work together, and all the examples I have seen of that, let's just say it doesn't make for the best dynamic in the workforce. And without diving too much deeper into my personal experiencing, having witnessed married couples work together, it is just a tad awkward being around people that know each other so intimately, so that when something positive happens or something negative happens, they are not always conscientious of the fact that they are around other people. And we're just gonna leave it at that. But hopefully that is not the dynamic between Melissa McCarthy and her husband, the director of a few of her films, Ben Falcone, who also wrote this film. But like I said, the husband and wife combination is not the only personal connection the film has going for it. As I mentioned earlier, Melissa McCarthy and Octavia Spencer are good friends in real life, which I am sure will translate to them having great chemistry on screen, given that they are playing a pair of friends, so I'm sure their real-life relationship will help them in portraying two characters that need to know fairly intimate details about each other. And I do have to say that I was very surprised that Octavia Spencer would be in a film like this. It does all make sense with her being friends with Melissa McCarthy, but she is a very quote-unquote serious actor. She has 3 Academy Award nominations, 1 win, and has appeared in such films as The Help, Hidden Figures, and The Shape of Water. So I do think it is a little surprising, at least initially, when I see an actress like this in a film with a goofy premise that is meant to be played for laughs, but then again, I probably shouldn't be that surprised. Spencer has dipped her toes in the comedic pool earlier in her career. For example, she was in Dinner for Schmucks, where she played a pet psychic with the incredible ability to read pets' thoughts. And she did have a rather funny guest appearance on 30 Rock, where she played a fictional diva-ish version of herself. So while she may be best known for her roles in dramatic films, she does have a good amount of experience in the comedic arena. So having Spencer and McCarthy as the lead duo in this film should provide a lot of laughs. A few of the other cast members joining them in Thunderforce is the very funny Jason Bateman, who is probably best known for his work on Arrested Development, as well as the show Ozarks. In this film, he plays a character referred to as the Crab, and this will be the second time he teams up with Melissa McCarthy in a film, with the two having collaborated on the film Identity Theft. So clearly that was a positive experience for the two of them, and they must like working together if they are teaming up for a second time. And I'm sure that experience, having worked with each other in the past, will translate to some funny moments in Thunderforce. And I guess it's not a superhero film without having a supervillain to fight, which in this film is simply referred to as the King, and that role is going to be played by Bobby Cannavale, who honestly, when I take a look at him, the best way I can describe him is a discount Colin Farrell. But in fairness to him, he is a good actor and has appeared in a good amount of projects. For instance, he has been in actual superhero films. He is part of the MCU and the Ant-Man franchise, where he plays the stepdad of Paul Rudd's character's daughter. So while this may be a downgrade in terms of how high profile a film he is appearing in, but I would say playing the supervillain is an upgrade over playing the stepdad. And for some of our listeners, perhaps the stepdad and the supervillain are one and the same. So I empathize with people where that is their situation. But I am sure that Bobby Cannavale will turn in a menacing performance as the King, which when I hear that title, I just think it's another example of this film taking a shot at the quote-unquote patriarchy and supports my earlier comments on this film being about female empowerment when it comes down to it. But again, whatever the hidden meaning in this film really is, on the surface, it does appear to be a very goofy comedy that can provide a couple laughs. So, for those of you in the mood for a screwball comedy that takes a satirical look at the superhero genre, check out Thunderforce, which will be arriving on Netflix Friday, April 9th. But for me here on the GSMC Movie Podcast, I'm going to be taking a quick break, but be sure to stick around because coming out of our next segment, we again will be bringing you the GSMC Movie Podcast news report where we touch on different things in the industry. And with it almost being a full month since theaters have been opened back up, I want to give a little box office report, which I do think may be its own segment in and of itself. But for this episode, we are going to include it with the segment where we touch on different news about the industry in terms of what projects are being developed and other things as it relates to the film industry. Once we have covered all the bases on that front, I will be taking a look at the new film, My True Fairytale, which is about two young girls who are in a car accident. Both survive, but one goes home to her normal life while the other mysteriously disappears and goes on to live the life she's always wanted. I do have a theory about this film, but I will save that for the next segment, so be sure to stick around to hear that. And be sure to stick around until the end of the show, as I am going to be commemorating the 5-year release of the film Captain America Civil War, where I am not just going to take a look at the film itself, but really take a look at the effect it had on the film industry and how it is sort of a prime example of a topic that's been thrown around a lot over the past decade, which is the death of the movie star, which is a concept that a film can no longer attract an audience solely on the merit of the lead. And that actors, with possibly a few exceptions, are not box office draws in and of themselves. So I will be taking a look at that topic, and there's a lot to say for both sides of that argument. So definitely stick around until the end of the show to hear about that. But for right now, we are going to take a quick break, but don't go anywhere. The GSMC Movie Podcast will be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Hello everyone, and welcome back into the GSMC Movie Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Rich McDonough, and in my last segment, I talked about the family-friendly comedy Thunderforce, which is a film that takes a satirical approach to the superhero genre. This film stars Melissa McCarthy and Octavia Spencer as the titular Thunderforce, who both have received supernatural abilities and are going to have to battle it out with Bobby Cannavale's character, the King. The film is also directed by Melissa McCarthy's husband, Ben Falcone, and Thunderforce will be the 5th time that the couple has collaborated with each other. So for anybody who is in the mood for a screwball comedy that takes a few shots at how commonplace certain tropes have become in the superhero genre, Thunderforce is set for release on Netflix Friday, April 9th. So be sure to check it out if you are interested, and also be sure to stick around until the end of the show, as I'm going to be talking about the 5-year anniversary of a real superhero film, Captain America Civil War. Not only will I be talking about the film itself, but I'll also be talking about a couple topics that the film touches on. Most of all, this idea that has been floated around for a while, and that is the idea that we have witnessed the death of the movie star, and that actors are no longer a box office draw in and of themselves. And Captain America's Civil War is a prime example of that, of how audiences are more interested in what characters are going to be in the film than they are the actors. Just to give you an idea of what I'm talking about, that film had an Academy Award nominated actor, who is also nominated for an Academy Award this year, the late Chadwick Boseman, in what was essentially a supporting role. He had well established himself as a leading man at that point, and would even go on to helm his own Marvel film, Black Panther. But in the age of the modern blockbuster and modern cinema, having A-list actors in your movie or in the leading role isn't enough to draw in the audiences. So I will be taking a look at that topic, which you are not going to want to miss. Additionally, later on in this film, I will be taking a look at the new release, My True Fairytale, which is the story about 2 young women who survive a car crash. One inexplicably disappears and sets out to live the life she's always wanted, while the other goes back to living the life she's always known. I do have a theory about this film, which I will save for later on, so definitely stick around to find out what I have to say about that. But for right now, we are going to have another installment of the GSMC Movie Podcast News Report. And there is a good amount of stuff to report this week, from major castings to major awards. And since it's been almost a month since theaters have had the ability to reopen at limited capacity, I'm going to take a look at the box office report. But I say we are going to be starting on a high note, and I think the most encouraging piece of news this week is that Ang Lee is going to be receiving the BAFTA Fellowship. There are a couple things to explain about that sentence. BAFTA is the acronym for the British Academy of Film and Television Arts, and the BAFTA Fellowship is the Lifetime Achievement Award they give out to visionary filmmakers for the reason of, in recognition of outstanding achievement in the art forms of the moving image. The first recipient of this award was the great Alfred Hitchcock, and Ang Lee is just the latest in a long line of legendary filmmakers, which I think is well deserved, given his work on films such as Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, all the way to Life of Pi. I'll even give him credit for the work he did on the incredibly terrible first Hulk film. I really think he did the best with what he had, and what he had was a bunch of terrible CGI, but he gave his best effort trying to adapt a comic book into a film, and I will say the choice he made trying to make the film actually visually look like a comic book by introducing split screens and having those appear each time he was transitioning from scene to scene was a very bold move, and I gotta give him credit for it, even though that film is just a steaming pile of hot garbage. But that doesn't take away from his legacy, and congratulations to Ang Lee on being awarded the BAFTA Fellowship. Transitioning into some news that concerns a former recipient of the BAFTA Fellowship, and that would be Steven Spielberg. and his semi-autobiographical film that is in the works, actor Paul Dano has been cast as his father. Dano is probably best known for his roles in films such as Little Miss Sunshine, as well as There Will Be Blood, and is being added to a cast that already includes Michelle Williams and Seth Rogen. The film is said to be loosely based on Spielberg's childhood, where he was growing up in Arizona, where he first started making movies, but it is not necessarily going to be a biopic and more of a homage to his life. In other news regarding films that are in pre-production, Martin Scorsese, at the age of 79, is still going strong. He will be directing the film adaptation of Killers of the Flower Moon by David Gran, and this film will reunite him with two actors he oft-collaborates with. Both Robert De Niro and Leonardo DiCaprio are attached to this picture. This film will also be the first time they share the screen since 1993, when they appeared together in This Boy's Life. DiCaprio was only a child in that film, so it will be very interesting to see how they interact now that he is fully grown, for lack of a better term. And to give you some other news on films that have been greenlit, for some reason, My Big Fat Greek Wedding is getting a third installment. I was not even aware there was a second one, but I guess good for them. For a film franchise to have a bunch of no-name actors involved in it, to have sustained popularity and I guess necessitated a third installment, is pretty much just proof anybody can make it. But speaking of films, I've lost track of what number we're on. Apparently Saw 10 is in development, which I guess is just further proof that we are living in an age where if intellectual property has a pre-sold audience, studios will keep throwing money at it, despite how played out and redundant the premise is. But leading into our next topic, it is hard to find fault with that logic, because the box office numbers don't lie. And to clarify, the figures I am giving you are domestic numbers for the week between March 26th and April 1st, and they come to you from boxofficemojo.com. It should not be a surprise to anyone what film took the top spot in the box office report. Obviously, it was Godzilla vs. Kong, which raked in over $16 million domestically, and that's even with the film being released the same day on HBO Max. And while $16 million sounds like a modest amount in relation to what modern-day blockbusters usually rake in, again, not normal times, but it is a sign the theater industry is slowly pulling itself out of the COVID pit. Claiming the silver medal in the box office returns is the Bob Odenkirk film Nobody, which raked in close to $9 million. And it's very encouraging to see a standalone film that drew people in solely on its premise is performing what is considered well nowadays. So good for the film Nobody. Meanwhile, in the number 3 spot of box office drawings is Raya and the Last Dragon, which grossed just over $5 million. This film's theatrical release also has to contend with the fact it is available on a streaming platform as well, but that has not stopped it from grossing over $30 million overall. Another film that has grossed over $30 million overall is the film Tom and Jerry, which raked in $2.5 million last week. Not really sure how that film is still making money, but it just goes to show you how barren the movie landscape is right now. And the final film we will talk about is the film Chaos Walking, which takes the number 5 spot, having earned just over $1.5 million last week, which must be a major disappointment to the studio, considering since its release date, it has only made back about 12% of its budget. And it may seem small potatoes to quabble over how much films are making nowadays, given just all the other stuff that's going on in the world, but I really want the film industry to get back on its feet. I want quality films to be made. I'm a little sick and tired of being sick and tired of talking about films that really have a one-note premise and aren't really worth discussing, but also just from the standpoint of being an audience member. I really want to watch quality films. I was watching Godzilla vs. Kong the other day, and I have no idea why the studio felt the need to waste time building a story around two giant CGI monsters fighting each other. So hopefully this week is a sign of things getting back to normal, and there will be more exciting things to report. on the GSMC Movie Podcast News Report. This one did get away from me a little, so I only have a couple minutes left to talk about the new release, My True Fairytale, so I will try to be succinct as possible. So, the main premise to the film, My True Fairytale, is three friends get into a car accident where the car ravines into a lake. Two of the crash victims are recovered safely, yet the third one mysteriously disappears, kicking off a missing persons investigation. Apparently this film is inspired by true events, as pretty much everything is nowadays. But I have this theory that the filmmakers took a certain creative liberty when making this film, and I think that the character that disappears actually dies and ascends to heaven. In the trailer to this film, she describes herself as a superhero, being able to fly and turn invisible, which of course are supernatural abilities. And the fact that nobody can find her leads me to believe that she is dead. And that aspect of the narrative, where they're searching for her, unable to find her, is playing out because her best friend, who was also in the crash, has gone to hell. The torture of being so uncertain and not knowing what has happened to your friend sounds like a little bit of a personal hell. But I have absolutely no idea if this theory has any merit to it. Have not seen the film. There is not much press about it. All I'm really basing this off is the trailer I've seen for it. And if I'm wrong, oh well, this movie seems like it's meant to be one that is supposed to keep you guessing and on your toes throughout the entire time. And one aspect of the film that will definitely keep you guessing is who are these actors in it. Not to be rude, but this is probably the most unrecognizable cast of any film I have talked about here on the GSMC Movie Podcast. I know that everybody has to start somewhere, but I'm just going out on a limb, and if studios were producing films at the rate they normally do, I would have never heard of this film, and I would not be talking about it. Just to give you an idea of how low profile the cast members in this film are, the lead, Emma Kennedy, really only has one major credit to her name, and that is in the very niche Netflix original, The Politician, where she plays student number 2. So I suppose this film will be a good test to see if she has what it takes to be a leading actress. And I'm sure that this film will provide her with multiple chances to do so, as she is really going to have to be pushing the limits of what we would term normal behavior, which I guess is a benefit to making a film with a lesser known cast, given the actors are more likely to take chances. But in all seriousness, the average viewer is going to have no idea who the actors in this film are. Probably the most famous person is Bruce Davison, who plays Martin Goodwin, the main character's father. He's probably best known for being in the X-Men franchise. Another actor in this film is named B.J. Mitchell, who's probably best known for being on the shows Instant Mom, Like Family, and Greenhouse Academy. I have never even heard of those shows, so I couldn't tell you if they're good, bad, or even where to find them. But he will be playing one of the characters that survives the car crash, so I'm sure that he will be running a full gamut of emotions in this film. And the other character that survives the car crash is played by Morgan Lindholm, who again most audiences won't be familiar with, but in fairness to all these actors, they are all very young. So simply because they haven't had major exposure in their careers just yet, doesn't mean they won't be up to the task in this film. But in all seriousness, this cast in My True Fairytale is made up of a bunch of background actors and supporting figures. So hopefully everyone brings their A game to this film, not only to make it good and enjoyable, but to up their profile as individual actors. Because personally, I do have to say, with few exceptions, I have absolutely no idea who any of these people are. But, as I've stated before, that can be a good thing for a film, because you can really just see the person as the character, and not having to associate them with any of their past roles. So for any of you interested in seeing My True Fairytale, the film will make its debut on Friday, April 9th. It will be released in limited theaters, as well as available via video on demand. So be sure to check it out if you're interested in a suspenseful thriller. Right now, however, we are going to take a quick break on the GSMC Movie Podcast, but you're definitely going to want to stick around for our next segment, as I will be commemorating the 5-year anniversary of the release of Captain America Civil War, where I will be talking about the film itself,
talking about the real-life parallels you can draw between the source material and our own society. And on a grander scale, I'm going to be talking about how the film is a pretty good example of this concept that has been kicked around the film industry for a few years now, and that is how we may have witnessed the death of the movie star. This is a film with an absolute all-star cast, but when it came to getting people engaged in this film, they were more interested in the characters that were going to be involved in the film, rather than the actors who were playing them. So be sure to stick around as we are going to dive into all of that and more on the next segment of the GSMC Movie Podcast, which will be right back.
Watching TV has changed over time. Streaming has become the new norm. That's why Golden State Media Concepts television podcast dives headfirst to the world of cord cutting. Want to be on the loop of what's hot in Netflix? Or if it's not a preference, what about original shows in Hulu? We've got you covered. Join us as we fill in the blank and talk about movies to stream and what show you should be binging. This is the Golden State Media Concepts television podcast.
Welcome back into the GSMC Movie Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Rich McDonough, and in my last segment, I finished talking about the film My True Fairytale, the film that is seemingly based off of true events about three teenagers that are in a car crash where their car ends up in a lake. Miraculously, they all survive. Two of them are recovered and go back to living their normal lives, while the other disappears and seemingly has discovered her new supernatural abilities. My theory on this film is the character that ends up disappearing after the crash and believes that they have supernatural abilities actually dies and goes to heaven. Either that, or they are suffering from a severe case of psychosis following the accident. But whatever my theories on the plot are, the film is set for release on April 9th. It will be playing in select theaters and will be available via video on demand. This is a film with a relatively unknown cast, and while it does have an intriguing premise, I guarantee you if the film industry was turning out films at the same rate it normally had been, I definitely would not have been bringing this one up. But it does appear to provide some entertainment value, so be sure to check out My True Fairytale. But shifting gears from a film where a character believes they have supernatural abilities, we are going to commemorate the 5-year anniversary of a film where the characters actually have supernatural abilities. And we may be jumping the gun on this one, given that this film came out May 6th, but close enough. And the film I am referring to is Captain America: Civil War. This film was the final installment in the Captain America trilogy, and at the time of its release was the 12th highest grossing film of all time, raking in over $1 billion worldwide. And I want to spend some time focusing on this film for a couple reasons. One, it's just a really great film. Two, there is a lot of symbolism you can draw from the film that relates to the current society in America. And three, this film is a prime example of a topic that has been kicked around for quite a while, and that is that we are in the age where we have witnessed the death of the movie star. Now, Marvel may have done more than anyone to usher in this trend, given that they built this whole cinematic universe where there were going to be movies that featured ensemble casts made out of characters and actors that were leads in their own franchises. Now, all of a sudden, they are thrown into these mega blockbusters. And don't get me wrong, I think it's really cool that characters from different film franchises can come together to make a story that is greater than the sum of its parts. But in doing that, you kind of lessen the cachet that a lead actor has when they're really just one of the team. And in particular with the MCU, where audiences are more interested in seeing their favorite characters brought to the big screen rather than really caring about the actors that are playing them. Just to give an example of this, we all know that the effect trailers have on audiences nowadays. It was a big deal when it was revealed Spider-Man would be in the film, but I don't think that anyone cared remotely that Tom Holland was going to be playing Spider-Man. Now, he definitely did a fantastic job and has definitely grown into a star in his own right. It's just that in a film like Captain America Civil War, when you have a bunch of stars making up the cast, it kind of just desensitizes you to the idea of a movie star. But I will dive deeper into that a little bit later on in the segment. Right now, I do want to talk about the film in and of itself, because it really was a tremendous film, and may honestly be one of the best the MCU has ever produced. The film was directed by Joe and Anthony Russo, and they're just incredibly talented when it comes to the idea of subversion, knowing what the audience is going to expect, and making decisions from a storytelling standpoint that will keep them guessing, but will also make sense. So they're not coming out of left field. And it's very common in blockbuster films where the substance is sacrificed for the spectacle. But in this film and the other MCU films the Russo brothers had directed, including Captain America Winter Soldier, Avengers Endgame, and Avengers Infinity Wars, they were able to include both. There was also a lot to accomplish in this film. They had to essentially bring Captain America's arc full circle, as this would be the final installment in his franchise. They also needed to introduce new characters that would eventually be starring in their own franchises. Like I said, they had to introduce the MCU version of Spider-Man, and they also had to introduce Chadwick Boseman's character, Black Panther. And there really is no pun intended in this, but it really is a marvel at what the MCU films really became. They were standalone films that would also cross over with their other franchises while advertising the multitude of sequels that the MCU would also be producing, and provide spin-off material for original programming, as we're seeing now with Disney Plus debuting shows like Falcon and the Winter Soldier, WandaVision, and the Loki show that's to debut this summer. So MCU films have really just become this new form of media where not only are they standalone narratives, but they're also essentially advertisements for other projects, which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing, because one of the key rules in the film industry, always leave them wanting more. So if you have this ability to constantly be advertising your future projects in your current projects, why not take advantage of it? But Captain America Civil War was really a tremendous film, because for the first time since, I guess, their inception when they came together in the Avengers, we really saw a conflict between everybody's favorite heroes. And of course, superhero films are based around the unbelievable action and the out-of-this-world characters, but this was a fairly emotional film as well. A ton of characters in this film are driven by very powerful emotions. Elizabeth Olsen's character is consumed by guilt for accidentally causing the death of innocent people in the film's opening moments. Chadwick Boseman's character is dealing with grief, having watched his father die in his arms, and is seeking vengeance throughout the film. Robert Downey Jr.'s character, Tony Stark, finds similar motivation late in the film after discovering who is responsible for the death of his parents. And no character goes through more emotional turmoil in this film than the titular Captain America, played by Chris Evans. Not only does he have the ethical dilemma of choosing whether or not to sign a document that will essentially make him a glorified mercenary, but he has to cope with protecting his best friend, who is a wanted criminal, and is the only thing that he has left of the world that he lost when he was frozen. So for a superhero movie that's really based around a concept of essentially taking your action figures and smashing them together, this film really delivers on the substance aspect of storytelling. So many characters in this film are dealing with deep-seated emotions, and with all the conflicting motivations, it just sets the stage perfectly for the ultimate showdown we see. So I really have to give it to the Russo brothers and Kevin Feige for delivering a fresh, unique superhero film in a genre that it appears that there was really nothing new to be seen or had in. And I also have to give them props on the social commentary they provided in the film as well. This being the 5th year anniversary of the release. 2016, of course, was also an election year where we saw Donald Trump running against Hillary Clinton. And I'm not going to assign Team Iron Man or Team Captain America the Democrat or Republican labels, but I will say they really delivered a poignant message in the form of a film that really mirrored and illustrated how polarized and divided we were becoming as a nation. At the time in 2016, I really feel like we saw the death of compromise and meeting in the middle. And it really became, in terms of American politics, you fall on one side or you fall on the other, without there being any shades of gray. Now, I really believe it's not that simple, with there being a ton of issues that aren't simply black and white. And I think there are moments in the film that illustrate that, with there being multiple double crosses and characters coming around to a different way of thinking. So while I'm not entirely sure how much political commentary the filmmakers tried to insert into this film, I think there are definitely elements that you can draw real-life parallels to. But I think that's enough talking politics for one segment, and I really want to get into the main topic, and that is how this film is pretty much the perfect illustration of how we are in an age where it's really seen the death of the movie star. And by that, I mean an actor that can draw an audience into whatever project they're involved in, regardless of the source material. And before I dive any deeper into that theory, I do want to say there are without a doubt exceptions and movie stars out there that still command audiences, regardless of the projects they're in. Some people like Tom Cruise, he is still one of the most bankable actors in the world, no matter what he is involved in. It does help that he is attached to a major franchise like the Mission Impossible franchise, but say what you want about him in a personal sense, that man delivers when he is on screen. Another major exception to this rule is Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. That man is just a draw to all types of audiences, no matter what he does. He now is part owner of the XFL and has been the highest paid film actor multiple years in a row, attaching himself to such franchises as Jumanji, which I just really don't understand how there is as large an audience for those films as there is, but nonetheless, those films are incredibly profitable. He was also smart enough to attach himself to the Fast and Furious franchise, which again at one point was really a laughingstock of a movie franchise, but has since become one of the most popular around the world. And his involvement in major blockbusters isn't going to end anytime soon. He is slated to bring the wildly popular DC character Black Adam to the big screen in 2022. So while he is attaching himself to wildly popular intellectual properties, he still carries himself and acts like a movie star. So Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson may be one of the last of a dying breed. So while actors are no longer the main draw to bringing an audience to see a film, it is interesting to take a look at what brings in an audience now. Staying within the MCU, one of the stars of Captain America Civil War, Anthony Mackie, said in an interview, "There are no movie stars anymore. Anthony Mackie is not a movie star. The Falcon is a movie star." He would go on to add that when you used to go to the movies, you went to see the Stallone movie. You went to see the Schwarzenegger movie. Now you go and see X-Men, which is entirely true. I do harp on the fact that if you have a pre-sold audience to any type of intellectual property, studios will throw money at it to make a movie out of it, and audiences will come see it because it's something they are familiar with. That is why reboots are so prevalent, and why more and more studios are attempting to copy the success of the MCU and make a entire cinematic universe where their characters can cross over with each other. The recent release of Godzilla vs. Kong is a prime example of that. And that's a film where it doesn't even matter who the hell the actors are in it. The audience for that movie is drawn for two reasons: the giant monkey and the giant reptile that are going to slug it out. And you can find a plethora of examples supporting this theory even more. Will Smith, who at one point was one of the biggest movie stars on the planet and could draw people into a film solely because of his involvement, has had major box office flops in the last few years, and can only really find success when he attaches himself to films that are bigger than he is, like when he played the genie in the live adaptation of Aladdin. And that is because an established intellectual property coming from a studio like Disney does more to engage an audience than a standalone star. Now, does this mean you can throw simply any actor into a film with an established intellectual property as its source material? No. If we take a look at the prime example we're working off of, Captain America Civil War, this film is stacked with Academy Award nominated actors. Actors like Robert Downey Jr., Don Cheadle, Jeremy Renner, Scarlett Johansson, William Hurt, Chadwick Boseman, in addition to all the other incredible cast members that weren't nominated for Academy Awards, but are still incredibly high-level actors, yet when it comes to this blockbuster, they're all just playing a part. It is more significant that their character is in the film than the actor themselves. And that really begs the question for this new generation of filmmakers, how are they going to attract audiences when those audiences are getting more and more conservative? They only want to see something that they're familiar with and they have a connection to. They are not as willing as they were in the past to go see a film with one of their favorite actors in it, because it is now more about, does this film have some of my favorite characters in it? And this is just one of the many issues that the film industry is going to have to face over the years to come. With the big shift in people being more comfortable streaming things than going to theaters, they are going to have to rethink a lot of ways that they do business. Most of all being, how are they going to monetize this content? And what does that mean for actors and how they get compensated for appearing in films if being a high-profile leading actor doesn't have the same cachet that it used to? In recent years, there have been actors that enjoy their moment in the sun where they are the hottest thing on the block, and the next minute they are seemingly irrelevant. So I think inadvertently, films like Captain America Civil War are contributing to the quote-unquote death of the movie star. But that aside, it was a tremendous film, and I am happy to commemorate the 5th anniversary of its release. But that will pretty much do it for us here on the GSMC Movie Podcast. I do again want to thank everybody who is listening to the podcast, and if you have not, be sure to subscribe so you are always notified when new episodes are released. And if you enjoy the program, be sure to write us a nice review. Those really help a lot. And be sure to interact with us on our social media pages, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. The GSMC Movie Podcast Twitter is GSMC_movies, and our Instagram is GSMC_movie. So be sure to follow us on those platforms. Once again, thank you all for listening, and I will see you next time.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.